Well, I mean, definitely in the beginning, I had no intention or whatsoever that what I was practicing and what I'm still practicing now would lead to this to begin with. But martial art has a very, very deep meaning as far as my life is concerned, because...
Hello guys, and welcome to the brand spanking new Bloodsport podcast. If you'd like the following content, we'd really appreciate if you drop our new Orbital MMA Twitter account a follow. You'll find the link in the description below. On this week's episode, granted that it's fight week, I'm going to run through the absolutely stacked UFC 249 card. In the build up to this card, we've seen it all, from the discussions of lockdowns, fight islands, tribal lands, government lobbying, and the involvement of Disney. I guess it's been one of the most publicised cards in the history of sport. Dana White has staged a Catch Me If You Can style flurry, trying to get this event into the calendar in the midst of a global pandemic. And I guess, in fairness to him, his hunger to get it done has prevailed. I'm going to jump straight in and look at the main event between Tony El Cucuy Ferguson and Justin the Highlight Gaethje. I think when Dana White announced this fight in the wake of Khabib versus Ferguson being cancelled, most people immediately thought that this one is going to be an absolute bloodbath. All you have to do is look at both fighters' records and it more or less confirms that thought. Ferguson has 12 knockouts and 8 submissions on his record, with next to all his UFC opponents leaving the octagon looking like, as Joe Rogan put it, they fell off the side of a train. I think many people may have seen the eerie collage at this stage doing the rounds on social media of the bloodied and swollen faces of his last 8 opponents. Gaethje, on the other hand, has provided us with some of the most entertaining fights in UFC history, particularly his one versus Dustin Poirier in 2019. Justin has 21 wins and 18 of which have come via knockout. He is a fighter that tends to go out on his sword because of his 2 losses, he's been knocked out in both. His fights to date have helped him become the first fighter to earn a post-fight bonus in each of his first 6 UFC fights. I'm predicting that the vast majority of this fight is going to take place on the feet, as both Tony and Justin will probably recognise each other's high-level wrestling backgrounds. Tony's a former national collegiate wrestling champion, and Justin was an NCAA Division I All-American fighting out of his native University of Colorado. On the basis of that, I think that both fighters will be confident in their striking abilities, and they'll probably see it as their best way to get the victory rather than getting probably involved in a lethargic wrestling match. I think Tony will think that he has the experience at this stage of his career to get involved in scrambles with Gaethje and get in and out landing some damaging shots and his infamous elbows and come out relatively unscathed. I think his game plan might be to inflict as much damage as possible on the feet, and if he can't get the knockout, he might wait for Justin to get desperate, go for the takedown, and then use his black belt jiu-jitsu to look for the submission there. As we know, Tony is as good on the bottom as he is on the top, and can submit you from any angle, any position. Perhaps he may even treat the crowd to another one of his renowned Darce chokes. Justin, I think he certainly thinks that Tony intends on standing with him, and he basically gave his game plan away in an interview in April where he said that I'm going to attack his body, I'm going to attack his legs, and then whenever he's worried about those, I'm going to punch him in the head and hopefully he'll go to sleep. If not, he'll probably go to cut me up with some elbows and probably choke me out late in the fight if I don't put him to sleep. This could be a really astute bluff, but genuinely I think this is exactly what Justin intends to do in the fight. I think he and his team have realised that Tony does get hit a lot in fights, and they will see Justin's power, his pace and his pressing as probably his biggest assets, and these may help him snatch that interim title. Before I make my prediction, I'm going to quickly skim through the training camps of both fighters. Tony's fight camp has been extremely well publicised. Firstly, he's reintroduced sparring back into his training regime. I think before this camp, he hadn't sparred in training since 2015 when he was training for his bout with Gelson Thibault. He's got this ethos, I believe, that he doesn't want to hurt his teammates in training, and he finds it completely unacceptable. But I think he's definitely going to benefit from sparring, and we'll see an even more focused and fine-tuned Tony because of this. Then there was the decision to ignore the fact that even though his fight with Khabib on May 18th was cancelled, he still met the 155 weight limit, which he broadcast live on Instagram back on May 17th. I actually have no idea why he done this, but I suspect he just wants it to tie in with his champ shit only trademark, and he just wants to prove that he is a true champion. He'll always show up and he'll always make weight. I think that it's been great publicity for him, and he's probably gained a lot more fans and followers because of it. Do I think it will have any effect on him for the May 9th date? If it was any other fighter, I probably would have serious concerns, but in the case of Tony, I don't really. He's possibly the most unique and the most well-drilled fighter to ever grace the UFC, and I think the experience of frequent weight cuts from his wrestling days, he's probably going to be in a better position than most not to feel the effects of going up and down in weight in such a short space of time. Going to the other camp, I think Justin will have definitely benefited greatly from getting the extra 3 weeks added to his training camp after being called up to replace Khabib on such short notice for the May 18th fight. Justin, he's been training with fellow UFC lightweight Drew Dober, and according to reports, the sparring sessions have been very tough. Dober himself is actually training for a fight with Alex Hernandez on May 13th, which is also taking place in Jacksonville, Florida. Those who may not be familiar with Drew Dober, he is a very experienced UFC fighter. He joined in his early 20s, and I believe he's in his late 20s now. He fought on the McGregor versus Cerrone card back in January, where he got a very impressive first round TKO against a highly rated European fighter, Nasrat Hasparat. For those that don't know too much about Drew Dober, I think having Dober as a sparring partner will greatly benefit Justin in keeping him sharp and focused. Realistically, given Tony is such a unique style, there's probably no fighter on the planet who they could have brought in to mimic his style. So I think in the midst of COVID-19, with a lot of gyms even closed and training partners fairly scarce, I think Justin has done very well to find such a high quality partner. Now to make my prediction on who's going to win this fight, I think it's very hard to go against Tony Ferguson on this one. With a dozen straight wins, the most in UFC lightweight history, and his last defeat coming just over 8 years ago to Michael Johnson, I'm confident that Tony will probably win this fight. I think he has far more weapons in his locker, and I think his coach, the great Eddie Bravo, will be a massive aid in helping him coordinate a plan to win back his interim lightweight title. I can see Tony winning via knockout or submission, and I really don't see the fight going past the third round. Saying that, stranger things have happened, and given how many times Tony and Khabib has been cancelled, I would not be surprised at all if Justin comes in, gets a somewhat shock win, and snatches the next title shot away from Tony. Next, I'm going to look at the return of Dominick, the Dominator Cruz, to the octagon to try and reclaim his bantamweight throne in his title fight versus Henry Cejudo. Firstly, I'm thrilled to see Dominick back, but to a certain extent, I'm mildly disappointed that due to COVID-19, we seem to have missed out on quite a few interviews which always help build up and sell his fights, because he's a master of trash talk and he's always very articulate in calling out fighters and creating an air of doubt in their minds. To be honest, I'm quite surprised to see Dom returning to fight again, given his past injuries, his time away, and the fact he has a good career as a commentator behind all this now. The basis of Dominick's game is always centered around his excellent footwork to initiate his setups, land some takedowns, and get him in and out of scrambles unscathed. I remember on an episode of the Joe Rogan podcast after the Cody Garbrandt fight, he revealed that he shot some Botox into the bottom of his foot before the fight to repel the effects of fasciitis back in 2016. I just wonder, considering it's got to that stage where he's got tendonitis in his foot, it's incurable, and I really don't know how mobile he is, considering the 3 ACL injuries in the past stacked on top of that. I wonder how he compares to the Dominick Cruz of old, basically. I know he came back to defeat TJ Dillashaw via decision back in 2017 after a year out, but I'm not sold at the moment that he's going to be the same fighter as he was 3 years ago. Regardless, I'm sure he's going to see it as a perfect opportunity to regain his title, and he will come back extremely motivated, as he always does. Firstly, I think he'll recognise that he's jumped Aljamain Sterling in the queue for the title shot, and secondly, he probably sees Cejudo more as a flyweight than a bantamweight, and he has heavily criticised them. I guess most people may recall the interview last year on the Ariel Helwani show, where he basically came out, criticised Cejudo for about 10 minutes, saying that he's had everything gifted to him so far in his career and that he's a soft fighter. I think he might also see Cejudo as being relatively inexperienced in the weight class itself, as he's only had 2 UFC contests at bantamweight, namely his win versus TJ Dillashaw and his defence versus Marlon Moraes. Cejudo, on the other hand, is like Marmite. People love him or hate him. All in all, he will go down as a future Hall of Famer due to the fact he is a double champ. He has an Olympic gold medal as well in wrestling. And he did keep the flyweight division alive after Dana White had more or less intended on cutting it completely from the promotion. At this moment in time, Cejudo has been the far more active fighter, and he'll be extremely confident at the moment. I can see him starting really strong and applying the pace, perhaps to try and expose any ring rust Cruz may have. All in all, I don't see Cejudo putting away a man who's never been knocked out in his career, so I'm going to predict that Cejudo wins by decision. We did see in Cruz's comeback fight versus TJ Dillashaw, his legs completely go for 2 rounds, and he still managed to be battle hardened and see his way through them. So regardless of how restricted he is now, I still think, minus the footwork, he'll be good enough to stay in the fight. The next fight I'm going to look at is one that has fans' mouths watering. It's the heavyweight clash of Francis Ngannou versus Jarzinho Rozenstruik. This one is geared up to be a first round knockout, or it might be a cagey, uneventful fight where both might realise the other's equalising power, and they might sit back waiting to counter and capitalise on the first mistake made. I guess many are fearing that it may be a similar fight to Ngannou versus Lewis, but fingers crossed it won't be. It's going to effectively be a kickboxing match, and I don't see either looking to take the fight to the ground. This should suit Rozenstruik, as we learned in his bout with Overeem. He found it very difficult against a high guard and being able to defend takedowns and get back up to his feet. If not for the lip-rupturing strike in the final seconds of that fight, Rozenstruik would have lost all 3 rounds on the judges' scorecards. So in a way he was quite lucky, but the way he put Overeem out was terrifying. The whole lip going to one side and bursting just made for very violent TV. Rozenstruik has been a breath of fresh air to the UFC. He seems like a real humble, respectful guy in his interviews, and I really admire that he had the balls to call out Francis Ngannou. I think he referenced him in his post-fight call-out as the scary bad guy that nobody wants to fight. The fact he is the first UFC athlete to come from Suriname, he seems to have great pride in where he's from. And when his fans do turn up to the fights, we all seen after his fight in MSG, he went and embraced them close to the cage. He brought his father in. He said that everything he does, he wants to make his father proud. And he's got a real close relationship with his corner team. And you just get a real good vibe out of his camp. I think the fact that he called out Ngannou, we can learn a lot from that. He clearly isn't scared, and I think he really trusts his capabilities and what he brings to the octagon as maybe the tools to put away Francis. This one is a very tough one to call, given that both are confident, coming off impressive streaks, notably Ngannou's recovery from his losses to Stipe Miocic and Derek Lewis to go on and brutally knock out contenders Junior Dos Santos, Cain Velasquez and Curtis Blades, all inside the first round. Although Rozenstruik will be fighting with the pride of his beloved Suriname behind him, I still think that Ngannou might be too much for him in this one. Ngannou has a 5-inch reach on him, and I think that could be the factor in swinging this fight. I think it'll give Ngannou the opportunity to stay at bay, while Rozenstruik is going to have to close that reach. And on the way in, I think he might be caught with Ngannou's equaliser, and I'm going to predict a first round knockout in this one. The final fight that I'm going to give my 2 cents on is the featherweight bout between Calvin Kattar and Jeremy Stephens. Kattar has become a real fan favourite in the UFC, mainly down to his high-level striking, and he will be looking to bounce back following his defeat via decision to Zabit on the UFC Moscow card. On reflection, I think many fans would have liked to seen that fight being scheduled as a 5-rounder, as Kattar really came to life in the 3rd round, troubling Zabit, and he actually took that round on all 3 of the judges' scorecards. Personally, I think Kattar's most impressive outings came against Shane Burgos and Chris Fishgold. He handed Burgos his first defeat by taking his time, keeping Burgos at bay with his jab. Then he finally adapted to his timing and TKO'd him with a ferocious uppercut early into the 3rd round. In his bout against former Cage Warriors champion Chris Fishgold, Kattar was tested by both taking and evading some wild heavy shots from Fishgold. As it was Fishgold's UFC debut, he was clearly came out with an intention of making a name for himself by taking Kattar's head off. Kattar identified that Fishgold wouldn't be able to keep up that pace, and he took his time and eventually knocked him out with a clean strike just behind the ear, immediately sending Fishgold's equilibrium into orbit. In this fight on Saturday, Kattar will be coming up against the self-proclaimed hardest-hitting 145er in Jeremy Stephens. Stephens, I think, will be a true test for Kattar, as he's definitely one of the most experienced fighters in the UFC. Unfortunately for Stephens, decision losses have been the main factor in him not taking his career to the next level. He's came short on the judges' scorecards in bouts against Thibaut, Pettis, Cerrone, Swanson, Charles Oliveira, Max Holloway, Frankie Edgar, Zabit, and most recently Yair Rodriguez, to name a few. This one should be a violent war, I think, and I can see it, aside from the Zabit fight, being Kattar's biggest test to date. But ultimately, I think Kattar will emerge victorious, and unfortunately for Jeremy Stephens, he may have another decision loss added to his record. I think, like the Ngannou-Rozenstruik fight, this one will come down to height and reach defining the fight. I think it'll be able to be used by Kattar as his advantage to stay away as best he can from getting involved in a brawl with Stephens, and that should get him the win. Finally, I'm just going to do a quick run through on my picks for the other fights on the prelims and early prelims. Like many fans, I'm still shocked that Greg Hardy versus De Castro made it onto the main card, but not to dwell too much further on it, I'm going to pick Greg Hardy to win that one via knockout. In Cowboy Cerrone versus Anthony Pettis, I'm going to go for Anthony Pettis. I think in their first fight, Pettis looked head and shoulders above Cowboy, and he put him away with that beautiful liver kick that immediately downed Cowboy. In Cowboy's recent fights, he hasn't looked impressive at all, and I'm definitely going to go for Pettis via knockout in that one. In Olenek versus Werdum, I'm going to go for Werdum. I'm going to go for Esparza in her bout versus Michelle Watterson. I'm going to go for Souza in his fight versus Uriah Hall. I think Luque versus Nico Price is going to be a very good fight. Their previous one was staged in Brazil as a main event, and Luque got the upper hand there, and I think he's going to get the upper hand again. But I'd be unconfident of that one. but I think I'm going to go for Luke K. Going to go for Bryce Mitchell in his bout versus Rosa, and I'm going to go for Span in his bout versus Alvey. So that finally brings us to the end of this episode. I'd like to thank anyone who stuck around and listened. Everyone enjoy the card on Saturday and stay safe.